Karl, this is a historic episode. I think because for the first time in months, I actually let you know when we were going to start recording.
Yeah, no, that was a good move, especially since I turned my camera off.
Yeah, you're saying that you are in fact a real person and not a 2D image of a gas mask and a hat.
That's true. That allegedly.
Some have said.
It's
Yeah.
funny. Speaking of that, like, uh, De and I did the Inquisition with Stormy recently, and it's funny because he and I have been communicating in one form or another for like 10 years. It's absolutely hilarious. I would just comment on podcasts he would do, and then like he read my book and my first book, and I didn't know about it. Then he read the second one, like with no prompting or anything like that, and then we met in person, and it's so funny because just how it is. You see someone, you go, oh, I had this totally different picture in my head, compared to who you are and what you do and everything like that. He seems normal.
The
Good times.
honestly, there was a funny instance of that. As you have heard, and the audience likely has as well. I've been trapped in the great right wing travel disaster of
Yeah.
2026. But point is, that was obviously to go to a sort of behind closed doors event. And it's funny because one of the guys who I hadn't met came up to me and without, and I won't say who this was because I don't want to expose him, but without knowing who he was, no one had explained to me. I just greeted him by his username because his profile picture was so close to what he looked like.
That's
It
hilarious.
just, it was completely seamless. I didn't even like think that it would be someone else. Though
That's
that
fun.
does happen sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, I have a million air travel hell stories, and none of them are. Can I tell one that is not mine, but it's the
Of
worst
course.
one I've ever heard? So to set the stage, I used to fly. If you talk to the average person, I used to travel a lot. I'd be on 30 flights a year minimum in the old days, and some of them were just day trips, uh, plenty of overnight and cross continent. But I also my world bumped up against people that were, what they call the road warriors,
Yep.
salespeople, who were constantly traveling, and they would have all their travel hacks. And, people talk about air travel like going down the toilet around COVID, but it's actually more like 2015, 2016, it started really deteriorating. I mean, everyone would have problems here and there, but where you would consistently have lots of problems, like a long time ago, like 60, 70 years ago, air travel could be tenuous, and then it got pretty smooth for a while. American is still the worst in my experience. Like, if every time I've slept,
In mine experience too.
yes, every time I've slept on the floor of an airport, because you can't lie down on the benches because they have the armrests so that like hobos don't take over the place, it's been because of American screwing up flights. So anyway, this is the best story I ever heard from a salesperson about uh, an innocuous air travel story that turned out okay. But picture this: you are a road warrior who flies 2 weeks a month for years on end, and you just have a system down that works really well. And because it just works like clockwork, and this is the system. You're in Detroit. You go visit a client. You go to the airport. Some snow is coming, but the flight is still on time. You're supposed to board the flight in an hour and a half. They say it's on time. You're in the bar, and what do? You're taking a red eye, and you want to wake up refreshed in the morning in Florida, let's say, in Miami. And so you get out the Ambien, and you wait for the boarding to be within, like, we're boarding in 30 minutes and the flight is still on time, and you're like, okay, if it there was going to be a problem, I would have known by now. So you take the Ambien and you down it with a slug of Jack Daniels, right? As one does. And 5 minutes later, you get your flight is canceled. You're screwed. And the way this guy describes it, he started to feel the tunnel vision of the Ambien kicking in as he's like standing there talking to the, harried woman at the counter who's arranging a hotel for him to stay at that's like at the airport. And he starts going, no, 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 no. And then he forgets everything from him saying the last no until he wakes up, like lying down in the snow in downtown Detroit in a doorway, like missing a shoe. Fortunately, like probably only recently. And it's like 5 a.m. and he's cold, but not that cold and wet, and has no luggage. He does have his wallet and his cell phone though. And so for all he knows, he like got in a cab and probably said something stupid like, screw it, take me to a bar or a restaurant or something like that, and just doesn't remember it. Pretty good
Honestly,
story.
Yeah. Given the earlier half of this week, I completely understand. Like if they could just give me Ambien and Jack Daniels on every flight, I think I would be in a much better
Yeah.
position. Honestly, the other thing is, and this might affect you slightly less, Karl. I am physically too large to fit in most airplane seats now,
I believe it. Yeah.
and
I'm
I'm not a
barely
big guy.
I'm barely you know me.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm barely
You're like
comfortable ish.
and you were like I would say like an average guy, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Pretty
if I am
median.
ever so slightly above average and simply cannot fit, like what do we do with like the Akimbe Mutombo style guys? Like simply what do they do?
You stack
Uh,
them on each other down in steerage.
which again, given enough Ambien, I'd be okay with. You know what? Fine, Mr. American. You clearly want to, stack people like cordwood. I'll sign up for that. But I have some conditions.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to tell you, man, if you want to know pure hell, fly on an Asian airline in
Oh
coach.
no. You gotta explain that.
Okay.
I don't
Even
object to it, but I know that there's a story there.
even in the front row where you have the most leg room, you will still not be able to adjust your body. So imagine an airline that makes American look like like a piano concerto of delivery and comfort. Like you're in the lounge, you're really comfortable. No, it's brutal. There's a bunch of kind of cut rate Asian airlines out of like Asiana's okay out of Korea, but it's not great. And then there's another one, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, that's out of Taipei that is the worst. And I had to fly it in the old days because it was affordable. And when you have a job that kind of exists on paper and you don't get paid until you show up in a third world hellhole, you're like, okay, I'm going to get the cheapest flight that I can. And next thing you know, you're in a sardine can hurling through the sky. There are tiny people behind you. And even with that, the seats are so close together that you can recline about 2 inches. And it's a 15-hour flight. It's good times.
The wildest flight experience I've ever had. And by the way, I saw before we went live a comment saying like, "Oh, is this another stream about how old Donald Trump has sold us out. I mean, that's true, but the whole reference of the urge to hoist the black flag is not in relation to politics at all. It is in relation to American Airlines. That's
Yes.
what this is about.
Yeah.
We are complaining about this, and if we happen to talk about politics, that's a secondary. You know, as you may have realized, we don't plan these out. But so I was after I graduated, my dad's not quite an expat anymore, but he's fancy person homeless. And so he just kind of, goes around. And so we spent some time in South America. And our flight in was on a international American carrier, right? Just like any other flight. The flight we took from one South American to another South American country was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It
I
was
believe
a
you.
normal airplane, but the seats were, those like plastic chairs they have with a metal frame that has like
Yeah.
3 holes in the back
Yep.
that you see in like high schools?
Yes.
That's what the chairs were. So, I'm not going to delude myself about the possibility of surviving a crash in the Andes just, based off of previous experience. You look at other people or
Watch
just
the
how
movie
airplanes crash.
Alive. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so maybe it's, if anything, a credit to them that they're like, you're just going to be turned into human maracas if this thing goes over. But that's a little alarming. And then also, I realized that roughly 40% of the people in this plane had never flown in an airplane before. And so they were losing it. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
absolutely
No, I
losing
know
it.
that feel. Yeah. That I mean the seats that you were in are that way because they void their bowels regularly
Ah,
and
jeez.
panic on the regular as well.
I didn't even think about that, but you're probably entirely right. But point
So
is,
they can just hose it down.
which honestly, considering my experience flying in and out of Dallas, given Dallas's demographics, I understand the appeal of. Uh, to quote a great thinker, it smell crazy in there.
Yeah.
But so if you've ever been on an airplane, you realize that there's this moment kind of just after takeoff where you sort of feel the plane. It feels as if it's dropping a little bit, right? It's sort of leveling off.
Yes.
Normal part of every flight I've ever been on. Dude, it was pandemonium.
Oh, I'm sure.
There
Yeah.
were loud prayers in Spanish. People were crossing themselves. And so, I'm not going to pretend to be one of these, road warriors, experienced travelers, but I do it a good bit for previous jobs, whatever semblance of a job I have now. So like, not done it before. And I'm not particularly nervous, even given the seating. But when everyone else starts losing it, you start looking around and you're like,
Yeah.
maybe they've seen something I haven't,
Yeah. You're wondering like, can I just not see the wing over there? Is it on fire? Are there
is there
gremlins
some
pulling
separatist
wires
element
out?
that shot a man pad at this?
Yeah, it's funny because I was complaining about flying in the third world to a buddy of mine who was a Marine Corps vet, and he said, I understand that's unpleasant. I get it. I'm not going to discount what you're saying, but let me tell you my worst flying story. Have you ever been in a Sea Stallion, like UH-53H or something like that? The way he described it is, and it's the old Marine Corps ones, he said that they would literally have, when they would bank and do, kind of high G maneuvering, because he was in places where there were Africans shooting AKs up at them and such, that hydraulic fluid was like spraying out of like valves. I think he said they were like overpressure. I don't know anything about helicopters. It sounded like a problem to me, but he said the crew chief said it was normal. That's when I became very frightened, and I was like, I believe you.
Have I told you the reason that my grandfather doesn't fly anymore?
No.
So my grandfather was an aircraft mechanic in the Vietnam War. And so, yeah, he worked on a lot of planes, obviously for the Americans, and had a fairly normal experience with that. The thing that freaked him out, though, was the Koreans.
Yes.
And obviously, the Koreans were savage fighters in that war, but particularly the Korean Air Force was, shall we say, not up to standard.
No.
And so he has dozens of horrific stories about just pure like lack of maintenance, lack of understanding, and
Yes.
also the extreme callous disregard for the chain of command for
Yes.
their own soldiers.
Yes.
And basically he has, would describe routinely going to his own chain of command and being like, "Hey, look, that plane's going to fall out of the sky."
Yeah.
And then, the door would pop off, the cabin would depressurize, and everyone would be sucked out to their death. And the Korean Air Force would be like, just part and parcel, like no one could have prevented this.
Yeah.
It freaked him out so bad, knowing sort of how the sausage is made, that he's basically never been on a plane since he got back to America. And I sort of can't blame him for it, right?
The way that my father-in-law put it, who had a similar professional career as your grandfather, if I recall, your grandfather, great grandfather, whoever, whichever sporty fellow was running around the world in getting into adventures. The way he put it is that one of their best pilots who was doing fighter bomber duty, that wasn't his department, but he would call for air support from these guys. And he had dinner with these guys, plenty of times at certain secret CIA bases, and would be talking to them. And they like grew up in huts where the roof was made of banana leaves. And, they owned like, and I've explained this. I said there were even in the early 2000s, you'd be in places where there's an old lady who owns like 3 things that are made out of like iron or steel. Everything else is handmade from local materials, but she would have a cell phone, right? And so imagine people who are used to, they hand turn, smoothbore muskets and make them actually to a very high standard of fabrication, and make their own black powder and everything by getting the bat guano in the caves and drying it out and having all their processes to make their own black powder. And so very crafty, but everything's handmade. And then they're flying basically an early 1950s prop plane that, is a 2-seater, but it can perform like a P-51 while also carrying let me do the math here, like 6 tons of small bombs and stuff like that. So interesting sporty fellows. And he would get to the point where he didn't like flying in the country very much at all because of the let's say the callous disregard that many of these people had. Given the circumstances, it made sense for them and what they needed to do, but really made you not want to be up in the air.
So, Karl, let's return to one of our regular conversation topics. How cool are Korean guns? Because I think they're really cool, like modern stuff.
I worked for a Korean company for a while. I never told you this. And I was going camping with some buddies, so I had my my SUV, and I was like, "Hey guys," because they're all conscripted into the army, right? I was like, "Guys, come down and see my arsenal," and I had an AR-15 and an AK, and they were like flipping out with how rad that was. They're like, "Oh, you have the gun of the enemy," and all that. And I was telling them I really want a Daewoo K1. Like, that's what I really want. And they're like, "No, it's crap. American guns are better." I was like, "You do know that Daewoo also makes the M16. And they're like, "But they're not as good as the American ones." It was just this mentality that they had. And I was like, "You're crazy." And I never had a Daewoo K1, but I did have some of their pistols like that. The one that uses the Smith & Wesson Model 59 mags, the double action. I think it's like the 51
D something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're great. They're great. They're really cool.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it is. And I think that's part of the allure is that they're so rare. Although I think Daewoo has spun up a U.S. based subsidiary,
Yes.
so maybe
Yeah.
that might change. Although it won't matter for me, I guess, or for you either, Karl. But I think part of it is that it's always been the kind of forbidden fruit, right? Very, very difficult to
Yes.
get. And of
Yes.
course, like it is an AR-18 derived design, if I'm correct, right?
That is correct. Yes.
But they're just cool. Like especially the one with the collapsing stock, like the K
Yeah.
model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, it's just neat.
It's sick as hell. Yeah. And they actually released a subgun version that James Reeves was showing off from SHOT Show this year, which he was saying was the coolest gun there. So there's some some Daewoo 9mm subgun that's going to be that they're trying to release in the US.
Now that is a '90s throwback.
Yeah.
The Daewoo DH-40, the 40
Yes.
Smith & Wesson version.
Yes.
That is the most '90s gun possible in that
Yes.
like classic stainless and black two-tone.
Yeah, and you know that that was in that something that I made reference to in that article about buying guns before the bans and then coping with them afterwards, which is the tendency becomes, okay, you're more restricted on what you can get. You're either going to get very small 9mm for carry that are actually still usable. Don't go too small, or you increase the caliber, right? And like 40 is one of those compromises that was kind of pointless, but it was, a 9mm size gun holding 10 rounds, like get the 40 version. That was a very 90s thing, to your point. But now you can just be like, oh, I'll just get the 10mm version instead if I'm stuck with 10 rounds, because that's where you get a real power differential.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we've mentioned this before, that there are you sort of have to make there's a decision tree for long-term gun autism. And one of them is, do you become obsessed with small or big calibers, which lead you to very different places. So for instance, in like a previous era, predominantly like the 70s and 80s, this was like the Magnum caliber craze, like how much powder can Bubba cram into his pissing hot reloads,
Yeah.
to turn his like, Ruger Red Hawk into a pile of scrap.
Yeah.
But I mean, you see a sort of similar thing with 10mm guys, where it is very much the like big bullet, uh, I guess you could say allure, which like I get certainly.
And 10mm is actually a great cartridge. It's it performs all beyond like the on paper metrics in terms of what it actually does. I mean, there's a fair school of thought that like a hard cast lead 210 grain 10mm bullet screaming out of your pistol is probably even better for bear than like 44 Magnum, in terms of you have several more rounds waiting in that magazine, and you use the magazine. It isn't one shot stop nonsense. So yeah, it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and I kind of get it that at a certain point it's just like it's the sort of like the bedside table drawer, of gun collecting, where you get to a certain point and you get something kind of weird you need to motivate yourself to stay interested, which, so like I don't want to kink shame, but fundamentally I think that there is a lot of shopping for a reason to own something I just kind of like,
Sure.
as as regards niche calibers rather, which like, look, fair enough, man. The it's interesting. Have you seen? It's been around for a while, but it's been officially experimentally adopted as the XM8, the shorter version of the SIG rifle.
Yes. Yeah. And there was an XM8 before in the
The fish gun.
Yeah, exactly.
which I think was in one of the Ghost Recon games.
I'm sure
Uh,
it was.
there's a whole bunch. It was actually also in a really cool History Channel documentary, or not documentary, History Channel uh, propaganda film that came out in the mid 2000s. That was predominantly about like the new tech. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like that, and then like the airburst grenade stuff, and like the 2010s like full face helmet like neck
Yes.
restraint thing.
Yes.
I don't entirely remember what it was called, but it was incredibly fascinating as like an 8-year-old, right? Because you're like, awesome. So we're gonna have like power armor and explosive guns and the XM8. That's pretty neat too. And all we got was just a $4,000 SIG rifle and another war in Iran.
Yeah. Yeah. And rounds that are incredibly high pressure that are apparently wearing guns out pretty quickly.
Who could have guessed? You know what will
Imagine.
fix that? Making it shorter.
Yes, I'm sure that'll help tremendously with the performance and
I
the
do think it's funny, by the way, that the U.S. military is like, yeah, we're gonna sue 3M for not making earplugs up to standard and giving our soldiers TBI. You know what else we're gonna do? Give them a 10.5-inch full power rifle, pushing out like extreme overpressure, just basically a portable TBI generator to every guy.
exactly. Yeah. Oh, and let's do CQB with those too. Let's see what happens. Just their
Yeah, why
brains
not?
leaking out of their ears. Good lord. It's
Which,
so
honestly, kind of based.
it's funny. There's this we really do live in a cyberpunk dystopia. There's okay, hear me out. You and I have strong opinions about the Taurus judge. However, Thomas's raging judge in 454 Castle, that's hella cyberpunk. Like I will grant that is the judge is very cyberpunk if you think about it. It's a 5-shot, mini shotgun handgun basically. And you can do all the numbers on everything, but like, to be honest, that's pretty cyberpunk. It's we do live in a cyberpunk dystopia, except like there's no razor girls other than them like slitting their wrists and thighs.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where, it really like Blade Runner came true, but we got all the downsides and none of the upsides.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like flying cars is obviously the example people think of, but like there are others as well. And yeah, it's sort of why I've been kind of fascinated with those films and the book as well, because there's obviously a huge parallel between the replicants as kind of this slave caste and what
Yeah.
we've seen with immigration, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because when I think cyberpunk, did you ever read William Gibson
No,
very
no, I
much?
haven't.
Oh my goodness. You have to remedy that. I could send you a pile of books if you would like, but William Gibson is an American shitlib who moved to Canada. Very good writer. I kind of don't care about anything that he's written since probably 2000, but very seminal. His stuff in the 80s and into the 90s, like the Bridge series was the last good one, I think. Although I'm sure it kind of extended out forever. But the basic premise is that that's the world that we live in, where the government is still around and is annoying, but it doesn't do anything for anyone, and corporations run everything, and the mass immigration has resulted in situations where like the average person basically lives in a hovel, like the closet pays like half a month's salary to live in a closet in a
They're
flop
stacked like
house.
cordwood and given
Yeah,
synthetic ambient.
exactly. That's owned by an immigrant who constantly talks about how great America is and stuff like that. And it's like, why are you driving a Japanese car or like a Chinese or Korean car. Like as a patriotic American, you should be driving a German car and stuff like that. And then there's also this thing I mentioned, the bridge. Is the idea is that homelessness gets so bad in San Francisco that one day, like the homeless bum rush the Golden Gate Bridge, which has very little traffic because of part of it is automotive controls and gasoline, and there's an earthquake that makes it unusable without tons of retrofits that the state of California can't afford. So the homeless bum rush it and then basically build a shanty town on the Golden Gate Bridge, which is just a totally lawless place. And the premise is actually incredibly cool, and the stories there are great. And it reminds you of going to pretty much any West Coast city in the last 10 years. There's a neighborhood that's an awful lot like that.
Oh, well, dude, it's coming to a neighborhood near me. Thanks
Oh,
to
of
one,
course.
Abigail Spanberger, who's decided to get rid of any sort of vagrancy laws, which is super cool. I appreciate that. Honestly, maybe we could break up our run of live shows to do an actual pre-recorded one, because I've never read Neuromancer.
Right
That
on.
that would make a pretty good review. We'll talk
That
about
would
this
make a
later.
great review. Yeah, let's take that. So
Oh,
Iceman
I know
F4.
you. I know you.
Yes. Hello, Jim.
For $20. And by the way, this comment is at least partially correct. You'll cry foul, you'll disparage, but you'll read this out in the end because $20 is $20. The Hostapa number one. You're right. I am. That's my price. I'll read out basically anything for $20. So I guess you've made your point. And I mean, that's cool and all, but why your rifle so heavy? My last comment on that one.
Why your rifle so overgassed?
Yeah. Why is it constantly beating itself to death despite being made out of an additional kilogram of steel for no reason? Actually, the funny thing is my anti-Yugo comments have earned me more blowback than almost anything else I've said on this show.
I believe
it. These people are insane, man. They're like rabid, all for an objectively worse gun.
Oh yes. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, you saw that picture that I sent yesterday of the pointlessly welded Chinese receiver. Yeah, horrifying. It's one of those things where I think it breaks out this way. Affordable AK gunsmiths in America who do novel things, they stop making money, or they reach a threshold where the demand becomes so high that they hire other people to do the work, and then they stop caring. And you get abominations like that. Or you do the other route, which is Rifle Dynamics, which charges $200 to inspect a kit. So to assemble an AK kit that you provide a parts kit for them to assemble it to spec and then refinish it. Not even necessarily refinishing it, but more like, probably molly coating it or something like that. They charge $1,300. And it's not like doing anything novel. That's not turning down, the gas block index on the barrel or shortening it and rethreading, with a bore concentric thread so that you can attach a suppressor that isn't totally overboard. It's like it's $1,300. And so it's almost like one direction or the other. There's very few that are still doing it. And it's AK. For some reason it's AK. And my theory, there's an interesting point. Jim Fuller, who founded Rifle Dynamics, who's doing something different, I think. Now I think he's spinning up some new business. He pointed out that we have this mentality that AKs are cheap because you could buy them for very little, but that was because they were surplus. They were government surplus from these programs that were building weapons, were like a key strategic element of all these countries, was step one, develop an AK-47 factory. And so like it's a major component of the national character is we have our own AK-47 factory, and we're not doing it for profit. It can be a loss leader essentially. And also, if you do a very bad job of these, you could get a bullet in the back of your head. So there are these guns that were made so that they eventually became affordable because it was like reduced labor in manufacturing. Eventually, once you have once you build this industrial infrastructure. And when you look at the story of how the Chinese built their arms industry up, you really see this is where they start out not with like the PPS 43, industrial based cheap guns that are good. They start with the PPSH 41, which is like a first generation where it's all forgings and hand fitted, this and that, way more operations because they had more people than they had, huge industrial concerns that could do stamping and stuff like that. So like you would take a truck factory and reorient it to make the PPS 43, and all you would need is like barrel boring and stuff and rifling and all that. But that's not that big of a deal once you have these massive factories that are already there. Well, it's hard to get to a massive factory, so that's why they do this first generation hand fitting stuff. So it's a really interesting philosophy. So that's why Jim Fuller's like, that's why it costs so much to make one-off AKs, is because you either need an incredibly expensive factory to just crank them out, or you need a shitload of manual work. And in America, you have to pay, hourly wages. And they're all the stuff is different too.
Yeah, you can't just have a whole city devoted to producing that thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that we may have mentioned this before, but it is sort of an interesting difference in, how our Cold War service rifle and theirs were produced, right? Where it's like the AR is basically designed for like small machining operations to be able to churn out endless derivations. Versus this like, sort of centralized method of production. Yeah, it's sort of, there's an interesting difference there. I mean, one of the other interesting trends has been the sort of, death of sort of European produced rifles.
Right? Yes.
Obviously, the FAMAS is gone. And soon the L81, which I realize has been made by HK for a while now, will be gone as well. And, part of it is because, to be honest, European powers' chances of getting into a shooting war are pretty low. So it doesn't matter in the same way. There's also the fact that they're, to be honest, they've been colonized, right? They're not really sovereign in the same way anymore. But I think that's a very interesting shift where it seems as if they're sort of taking globalism to its logical conclusion, even with something as basic as like what gun they give to, their guys.
Yeah. And this actually started at the end of the Cold War, a little bit before, like during the Cold War, you saw a lot of consolidations. But after the end of the Cold War, the European national armories were privatized and sold off to all these different conglomerates. And then they would basically get shut down. And then, in some cases in the run up to the Ukraine war, or literally after the Ukraine war broke out, a lot of them said, oh my God, we have a huge problem. We need to get these manufactories back up and running. And Spain, of all countries, actually did a fair bit of that. But most of their arms industry, which used to be a huge part of their economy, given the nature of their old political characteristics, one could say, they had to really scramble, and they're probably better off than almost anyone in Europe, other than the Belgians, because again, the Belgians have FN, which has always been a global manufacturer, and it's interesting. there was a book that I read that was written in the 80s, and I think it was Paul Ballar's Manual of the Mercenary Soldier, and it was written by a guy who had been a mercenary for a long time. And a lot of what people don't understand is that mercs mostly come in and say, we're going to be like a serious officer corps reporting to the president of some third world country to get your mess of a military up and running. And so they become the guys that make sure that there's like an actual small arms program that is training guys and repairing weapons and stuff like that. And so that's what a huge amount of what they do is actually about. And so one of the things that he said is that the FN salespeople were the best in the world, where they would wine and dine, these movers and shakers in all these shitholes. And that's why you see FN rifles everywhere. It's what do they call it? The right arm of the first world was, or of the free world, is one of the old descriptions of them. And it's because they were just great salesmen, and they would give people good prices for like long-term support on their stuff. Whereas like he hated the HKG3 with a passion, because I have my own theories around that, but and a lot of it is that they're frankly pretty cheap guns ultimately, and like they don't repair well. They're kind of semi-disposable. They're up to a high level of quality until you run into problems. And if you've ever seen someone diagnose an endemic problem with an HK weapon or one of their copies, like you would understand it immediately. When you look at like the bolts and everything, you're like, oh, I get why someone would hate this thing.
Yeah, I mean the domestic HK salesmen in the 90s were doing crazy stuff.
Yes.
Have you ever seen that one? It's on YouTube. It's like a 40-minute compilation of the ads that they would send to law enforcement. You ever seen that before?
Yes. Yeah. The old VHS.
It's wild. It's honestly super fun. Like there's a bunch of crazy stuff where it's like they've got guys dressed up in like British embassy style, like SAS pajamas, like running through the woods and like diving in the water. They've got like, fake explosions going off. There's a really famous one of this like super jacked black guy, where he's basically got an MP5 and he's holding it, and as it's shooting in full auto, he takes it through a full like 180 degrees, just to show you it works at any angle. And I'll be honest, if I were like the guy in charge of purchasing at some like podunk police department in the middle of nowhere, that would have worked on me.
Oh yeah,
like, it's really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the guys of your age, I feel like are particularly susceptible to HK propaganda. In fact, I can think of a few.
No, it's true.
Relatively prominent podcasts who definitely have bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, it's true. I'm very familiar with those guys, and the only reason I don't really have that mentality is I've shot a lot of stuff, and HK kind of lost its allure for me. Although they're very high quality weapons, I'm not going to poo-poo them. They shoot well. But I am from the era where HK was like, you suck and we hate you. And the whole thing with HK is you solve your problems by spending money. Whereas with other platforms, and also gun is fine, right? That's the HK mentality. Gun is fine. But other platforms, like you have more of an aftermarket support. You have other things that you can do with them, etc. Gun is not fine. It's okay to mess with them. But I do honestly, I really like the USP in 9mm an awful lot. And I also like USP 45s. They're really great guns. But the P7 is the one that I've been in love with my whole life. But is it worth? Is it good enough to? I mean, like if you're going to buy it to collect it and play with it occasionally, is a P7 M8 worth $2,000 or whatever they're going for now? I don't really think so. They are cool, but the problem is like you can't shoot it a lot because the parts are just like they're rarer than gold. I really want a you're gonna laugh at me. I really want the P7K3, which is the more of the smaller caliber one, because it does conversion for 4 different cartridges. The HK4 is the same way. The HK4 is like a stamped piece of shit PP, like Walther PP equivalent. It's just a blowback. But
So,
like the
Carl,
slide and stamping and welding of milled parts. Yes.
Carl, when you're
Yes.
saying that there are 4 calibers,
22 LR, 25 ACP, 32 ACP, 380 ACP.
so viewers, you may remember earlier when I referred to the decision, right? Where
Yes.
you pick which form of autism you have, and we joked about the big bullet guys. Carl, man, at this point, I think it's terminal. Your 32 obsession. I think it's in your brain.
It is 100%. But you may recall the conversation that we were having with your enabler, your dealer, as it were,
Yeah.
your pusher,
Yes.
about the joys of milling a little like O-ring into the chamber of your 32 ACP to increase the dwell time when you're firing it with the suppressor, which keeps the action closed slightly longer and thus improves the suppression level to where it's pretty much like shooting a 22 LR, subsonic, with a suppressor. And it's just so quiet, but it has more than double the terminal ballistics of the 22 LR round. And so here's my thing. 22, in Ghost Recon or whatever spec ops game, you have a guy with a suppressed Ruger, Mark 2, 3, 4, whatever, and it's like ting ting, and he's headshotting guys and they're going down, and it's like, to be honest, that doesn't really work that way. Like 20 subsonic 22 LR is anemic in the extreme, and the idea that you're definitely going to penetrate something thick, I don't want to sound horrible on YouTube, but is pretty delusional. And I know people that have survived such events which have occurred against them, and one, I don't recommend it. It's not like a good experience, but it's not a video game where, as long as you're within the center third of it, that it definitely penetrates and takes them down.
The one thing I will say that HK has done, and this actually aligns with your small caliber autism, is the civilian MP7, which has been teased.
Yes.
So here's what I'll say. I am aware, and I've had people with firsthand experience tell me they're not that good.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'll be honest. Gordon Freeman did a number on me. It's really, really cool in that game.
How many hours do you have behind that weapon in a video game?
A lot.
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't really play games much anymore, and those I do are incomprehensible nonsense. So but it's a lot, man. It's a lot. Same reason why I like the MP5 SD, which people like much more. But it's you saw me go through this rationalization.
Yes.
With my dealer, deliberately using an ambiguous term there. And it just doesn't make sense. Similarly, the MP7 doesn't make sense for a number of reasons, but it's just cool.
It's very
just
cool.
Really cool.
I mean, I'm the guy who was saying that the Keltec, what is it, P50 or whatever, is cool. You know, I just have to admit it. It's ridiculous. It's absurd, but they're super cool. I have a soft spot for the MP5K PDW for the same reasons. Video games that I played at the time, it was completely unobtainable. You know, you were like, I'm never going to own one of these because they were banning all the stuff, you know, and then HK wouldn't make, you know, HK stopped making them for the civilian market in like 1990. So in like 1993, of course, I was like, that is the sickest thing I've ever seen.
Well, it's incredibly aggravating because, and I'm sure you had the same experience where you realize something is cool at precisely the moment that either everyone else has had their attention turned to
Yeah.
it, or just after it became absolute unobtainium. And I guess my generational trauma as a Zoomer is assuming that anything that is cheap and good will soon cease to exist, right?
Yes.
So it's why
Is
I
that what
tend
you
to
tell
buy
your
surplus stuff. What's that?
Is that what you tell your wife?
Tell her, Karl. What sort of house
true.
do you think I live in?
No, I mean, like when she's like, "What's that? I haven't seen that one before," and you're,
Aramaic discourse, Jacobius Burton, the giggle switch enthusiast. Yeah, I'll take that
that's
on
true.
multiple levels. Well, not at all speaking about that in any legally definable way, but I have been going through the process of putting together, an AR trigger setup for my MB5, which I violated one of the first rules of buying a gun, which is don't modify it before you see if it works.
Yeah.
We're well past that point. But from talking to Pete and a few other guys who've gone down that rabbit hole, it seems relatively simple. And I am very curious to see how that system works. I will say I actually got one of the 3D printed lowers because advances in that have really improved the quality of the finish and as well as the durability. But honestly, even if I wasn't trying to go fast with it. Oh, by the way, Karl, I ordered some parts from your guys. I won't say anything more than that.
Right on.
I know you've done some design work for them, and I think I actually have one of your stickers. But anyway, point is, honestly, it's kind of just a flat improvement, both from an ergos level and also a stock HK MP5 trigger is
sucks.
Awful, man.
They suck.
Like people say, like, oh, it's a staple gun. It is actually remarkably similar to a staple gun.
And it costs a fortune to try to tune them. So no, that's such a smart move. Yeah. You're a
honestly, man,
Mr. Burden.
Thank you. Yeah, this is why I bring you on, Karl. But like, even you can get the cheaper Geisley triggers, like the G2S, which is like plus or minus $100, which I don't like as much as the LaRue trigger. A discussion for another day, but the LaRue one is more picky. Like it works great in an AR, but it doesn't work in a lot of the not ARs that take AR triggers, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But point is, really, really good. And for like $100 printed lower, some random parts, and a trigger, way, way better.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a product that sells well, and for good reason. It's because they it just takes care of all these issues that you have to cope about. Like the HK bros in the old days, before someone made here's how you do this using AR components, which are readily available and affordable at a very high level of quality, and also fairly consistent in terms of like the production so that it'll actually work. You used to have to send in your precious HK components, which cost a fortune, to gunsmiths and hope that it wasn't Friday by the time they got around to them, and spend like $400 to get a trigger job. So That's everything about HK. Is it's always been like super expensive stuff. Now, interestingly, like the VP9 is, produced in sufficient quantities, and the CC9 and stuff, that they're good guns, they're great guns. And they're produced fairly inexpensively, which is like what it should be. That's HK's model is, it's above an AK in terms of like quality, but it's still churned out in that same concept that it's like it's the Volks pistol. It's like an affordable pistol that everyone can own.
So I will say, speaking of things that have just absolutely ruined my brain, I will never get over thinking the 416 is the coolest thing ever. Really for no reason. Like, I'm not a piston guy. Piston guys, man, you got to send them to a home.
You did what in this cup?
No, I said piston guys need to be sent to a home.
Yes.
Because they just won't stop talking about it.
It's a Cars reference. My son watched Cars so many times when he was little that I hear piston. I think he did what in his cup? Because it's the piston cup.
Yeah, the best joke from that movie.
Yes, I apologize.
Which, by the way, somewhat disturbing note. The female car from that movie did a similar thing to a subpopulation of my generation that Lola Bunny did to yours. That is not a joke.
Oh my god. Oh my goodness. No, it's true. It's true. It's true.
Wait, there was one more thing about my flight. I forgot to tell you. So you and I have occasionally mentioned before, Femgooner slop, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So on one of my many, many flights to nowhere, I sat next to this lady with, dyed hair and a cane. And she was reading one of the Fourth Wing books, right? Which is basically like erotic dragon Harry Potter.
Oh, nice.
And it's just one of those things where I'm like, I know we joke about this, but it's weird to sit next to someone for 4 hours reading this.
Yes.
You're like, what are you doing? Why are you here? Why do you think this is okay in public?
That's
like,
horrible.
I don't want to. It is. Yeah. It's just like, I don't want to think about some stranger doing that. And we're literally cheek to jowl. It's again, homes.
I was so traumatized by a versioning issue I had with my first novel that when I actually did what you're supposed to do with the second one, which is I got my proof copy and I actually went through the whole thing. And I did that on a business trip, and so I'm on a flight with Faction with the Crusaders, and going through it and marking it up and being like, sometimes you know how I am as I always tell people that the very best way to determine your grammar is to read it out loud, or to like read it in a way where you're more deliberately kind of verbalizing it in your mind, which you can do if you can rotate shapes and things like that. I know many supposed humans can't do that, but you can do that if you're in the sound of my voice. And anyway, so that's to make sure like the grammar flows perfectly, etc. So I'm going through and I'm marking it up, and there's a woman sitting next to me, and she's looking over, and she asks me what the book is about or what I'm doing, and I said, "Oh, I'm doing some proofreading for a friend for a novel." And she asked what the book was about, and I was like, "Oh, the Spanish Civil War." And she's like, "Oh, like Hemingway," is what she said, which I knew that it would make you smile. And I was like, "Yeah, sort of." And because I was reading the point like right before I was reading it right before they execute a bunch of prisoners, and in the tail of the book, it's perfectly normal. Of course, you would do that. And so I just kind of left it at that. I didn't want to be too chatty about it. And what was she reading? it was some femgooner crap, but at least it wasn't bestiality themed. You're muted.
That's a term that we call damning by faint praise.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
it's the most
Traditional
slight
romance slop. Love
backhanded
the time of
compliment
scurvy.
possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, again, illiteracy has never been higher, and apparently everyone knows how to read. I'll leave it at that. The yeah, the process of proofreading, and I realize this is probably not super interesting for my audience, but I imagine you
It is
people
for us.
occasionally might catch an article that I've written. There's another one coming out soon, by the way, in Chronicles. Yeah, so you can do it yourself. Spend a lot of time actually think about it, or you can take a poorly composed screed and send it to your unemployed friends and make them read it instead.